Yesterday, House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer released a transcript of Hunter Biden's ex-business partner Devon Archer's 5-hour interview. Today, we are releasing the transcript from Devon Archer's interview with our committee. Archer confirmed several critical pieces of information on our investigation of the Biden's influence peddling schemes.
Democrats and Republicans gave conflicting accounts of what Archer revealed, with Republicans hell-bent that his responses were proof that Hunter Biden sold, quote, illusion of access, and that it implicated Biden, while Democrats disagree. Ranking member of the oversight panel, Jamie Raskin, released a statement Thursday, firing back at Comer, writing, quote, on Monday, Devon Archer, Biden's former business associate, confirmed in a transcribed interview that President Biden was neither involved in Hunter's business dealings, never profited from such dealings, and never took official action in relation to these business dealings. Archer's interview is part of a months-long probe Republicans launched to link Biden to his son's business deals. House Speaker McCarthy floated an impeachment inquiry even about this. So reopening the impeachment with Biden would also bring in, again, testimony from Zlochevsky, who is directly on Burisma, which in the first impeachment inquiry, he testified that Biden was not involved. Now you have someone who says they were in the room when Biden was on speakerphone with Hunter Biden's business associates there in Ukraine. This testimony, according to Republicans, is what we expected. But Democrats are saying that there's really no implication that Biden was involved in his son Hunter's business dealings. So crazy that the same testimony is being interpreted in two different ways.
No, but I think you have to investigate this to be clear whether or not the president was or wasn't directly involved in his son's business matters. I mean, I think about the one quote, this is for the big guy. I mean, who exactly is the big guy? What were they talking about? I think we should investigate this. And this, to me, isn't about being a partisan against President Biden, but at the minimum, this certainly seems to be unethical. And so if there is some smells of unethical behavior and activity going on, I think we should look into this and see where it goes.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous when we get into the place of the folks who are in power in the House Oversight Committee trying to make definitive conclusions about guilt or innocence based on hearsay in many occasions. This is one witness's testimony. It contradicts the testimony of Zlochevsky. It contradicts the testimony of what others have said about the matter. And so for Republicans like James Comer to come out outright and say that this definitely means that Biden was involved in his son's business dealings, and then Democrats to say, no, actually the testimony proves the opposite. I think maybe it would have gone a lot better if this was a hearing that was open to the public and they didn't have to go through a process to release the transcript just because their key members are talking to the press saying conflicting things. I think it would be much more responsible for the House Oversight Committee to wait until they've thoroughly investigated and they have clear and convincing evidence one way or another. And they also say we're committed to drafting legislation to prevent members of the highest office from having conflicted, goals when it comes to how they manage their foreign relationships as they relate to multinational corporations their families have a financial stake in. I think that would be a fine way to proceed. This infighting, like we're on a playground of, no, it says this, no, it says this, and just expecting the general public not to read the 141-page transcript is business as usual for Congress, but it's time for that business as usual to change.
I think a public hearing would certainly change that, but here are a few things that we do know. We do know that Hunter Biden received jobs, positions, titles, and a significant amount of money that he just did not have the experience for. Why? Well, maybe because he was the vice president's son. His father's now the president. He's selling paintings for hundreds of thousands of dollars now. Is he as talented? Maybe, maybe not. I guess that's subjective. But I think you're right, Jess. This is sort of part and parcel of politics. If you're connected to a wealthy or influential individual, whether you're the son or a close relative, then you are going to benefit from that person's position. And in many ways, we often find over time that that person themselves directly or indirectly benefited in a way that just wasn't visibly clear, which is why I say we should investigate this. If this were Donald Trump, I think Democrats would say, look, we need to look into Eric Trump, or we should look into Don Trump Jr. to see if the president has some type of direct or indirect involvement with the money made from his children. Why shouldn't we have the same standard for President Biden? I think we should.
Yeah, I think we absolutely should. I don't feel the need to defend President Biden whatsoever. I think that need to defend President Biden, you know, on the left and the establishment especially, it comes from a place of like tribalism, like, oh no, they're getting our guy. Instead of thinking, okay, yeah, people in the highest office in the United States have done things like this for a very long time, and maybe it would be good for us to take this seriously so this corruption doesn't continue on. I don't think anymore that it comes from a place of tribalism and like, this is my party and this is our guy and I like him more than the alternative guy. I think it comes from a place of really not wanting to believe we live in a democracy that's in shambles, not wanting to believe members of the highest office do and always have used their influence to accumulate more wealth and to have corrupt business dealings with the leaders of multinational corporations. That's really what went down here. That's a tough pill to swallow, I think, for a lot of Americans. We want to believe, like we were taught in school, that we live in the greatest nation in the world and that we teach how to do democracy and have freedom to other countries around the world. And it's a tough reality to accept that that's not how it goes. And it's a convenient reality, I think, to just say that Republicans want to get Hunter Biden any way they can, and they want to get Joe Biden to be dragged down with him. I think it's much more enlightened to say, okay, let's look at all of the facts of what happened here, and let's think really critically. If we allow Joe Biden to have his son do things like this, I mean, it's pretty clear corruption when you look at the timeline. The court of public opinion, I think, is divided across party lines for the reasons I just described. But when you see how Hunter Biden's payout from Burisma monthly, the energy company in Ukraine, going from $83,000 a month to being cut in half. When you see Biden talk about withholding $1 billion in aid to Ukraine unless Viktor Shokin is taken out of power, who was prosecuting Burisma at the time, it's pretty clear corruption. I think we all have a stake in weeding out corruption, even if it's our guy right now.
No, I think you're right, but it reminds me of the divine theory of kings. It's a legal theory, and it essentially is like you're born into something. And I think just a lot of our political leaders just feel like they're just born into these positions, and they just should not be challenged, specifically if it's their guy. And I think that's fundamentally corrupt. And I think if we're trying to be this example of a great democracy, as you alluded to other developing nations, well, they look at us and look at the corruption and say, well, if the U.S. is doing it, why we can't do it either. And that's a problem. I would also mention, Jess, as I think about the politics of this, Democrats are looking at the 2024 election, and they're looking at the numbers where 68% of Americans are not very satisfied with President Biden or the direction of the country. And the last thing they want is in the midst of a close race where people are questioning Joe Biden's mental, physical aptitude. They certainly are not very fond of Vice President Harris. They don't want an investigation that could unearth something that could be very damaging to the president. So, of course, they're going to come to the president's defense and say there is nothing to see here. That's what we should expect. But I think Republicans have an obligation to look into this, as I would say Democrats would have an obligation to look into it if it were a Republican in the White House.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I don't know what it's going to take for our country to get to the point where they say, let's investigate any of our leaders if there is an inkling that they're involved in corruption, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden. I think everyone has a stake in that. How convincing to people are the narratives in the mainstream press that the Trump family is super corrupt and has committed all of these crimes, and Biden is very innocent, and then the alternative that Biden has committed all of these crimes along with his son, and Trump is, somehow innocent. I think it's really hard for me to believe that those two realities are the extent of people's political minds in the country. I think people know that something's off about Washington as a whole, and that includes people like Donald Trump, who has risen to a position of power in public office. A lot of people think he's an outsider, but I think there's very clear evidence that when he was in public office, he really served the establishment and governed as an elitist to have tax cuts for the rich at the expense of everyday working class people who are still paying a higher tax percentage than people like Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett. Like, that's a reality that Trump allowed to continue when he promised to be a populist candidate and fight for working class people. Biden didn't promise that. He's very clearly an establishment candidate, but he also promised progressive things that he's not delivering on, both of which are caught up in some pretty serious scandals where it seems like there's a lot of corruption going on. What's it going to take for the American public to see through the narratives in mainstream media and realize this? I'm honestly not sure, because media has become so untrusted by the general public, and political discourse on the internet has become really dominated by people just fighting each other on the extremes. There's very little room for common ground in the country. And I think, honestly, people like Zuckerberg and Elon Musk have some kind of moral obligation to make their platform a place where that can happen instead of feeding the chaos.
I mean, look, regular Joe, or Main Street Joe, as he would like to be called, hasn't been that Main Street. I mean, look at the state of the economy. Most people are still struggling, and though there is some evidence that the economy is getting better and the recession is slowly receding, the Fed continues to raise interest rates, Jess. So if you're trying to buy your first home, it's going to be harder. I think interest rates just went up to 7%. Thank God I bought my house in January versus today. Otherwise, I may have to wait another year or so. And I would say most people generally expect for people of power or people with a lot of means and resources to sort of do some things that may be unethical. We all know it, Jess. We all have those conversations. Oh, you know, they did that. But people don't want it thrown in their faces. And when you read headlines of Hunter Biden making $80,000 a month, that's more than the average income of most Americans for over 12 months. He's making in 1 month. People say, wait a minute here. I don't like this. And so I don't think we can dismiss this. And I don't think Democrats saying, oh, there's nothing to see here is going to work. They are going to have to address this and deal with this issue at some point. And it may indeed have a significant impact on President Biden's reelection bid. More rising after this.